Okay, why don't we get started? I'm going to make a few introductory comments, and then I'm going to ask John Sartakis to introduce our speaker. We are very fortunate to have Sylvia Burwell here with us tonight as president of American University, so we're all looking forward very much to her comments. The Foundation's lectures on public service are really at the core of the Foundation. Senator Sarbanes gave the first lecture of this foundation on May 3rd, 2012, in this very room. He spoke and took questions for over 90 minutes on his life in public service. We literally had to drag him from the podium because there were so many questions that he wanted to respond to. He could have really continued all night if we had let him. Senator Sarbanes really put the foundation on the map 12 years ago, as it was our first event, and it was on public service. For anyone who attended the lecture, you could hear a pin drop. Everyone wanted more from Senator Sarbanes. He was truly the people's senator. He could talk to anyone about anything. He could discuss baseball, politics, labor issues, the economy, running a restaurant, washing dishes, disclosure issues under Sarbanes-Oxley, or legislative issues impacting the lives of everyday people. Following Senator Sarbanes in the series of lectures was Ambassador John Negroponte. Ambassador Negroponte was a quintessential public servant. For over 4 decades, he served 8 different foreign service posts and was an ambassador to 5 different countries. He also held important positions in the Department of State and also in the White House. Ambassador Negroponte has been a huge supporter of the foundation since its creation and was our honored guest at the foundation's 10th year anniversary. George Tenet was the 3rd speaker in the series in 2005. He served for 7 years as Director of Central Intelligence. And among other distinctions, he received the President Medal of Freedom, which is the U.S. highest civilian honor from President George W. Bush. Each speaker in this series has emphasized how proud they were of Greek Americans who, from humble backgrounds, studied hard, worked hard, and excelled in their chosen professions, but who never forgot their roots from where they came. Their success was a testament of the American dream. But most important for each speaker is what they gave back through public service. For example, Senator Sarbanes devoted his entire life to public service. He never aspired to go into private sector, but wanted to help virtually everyone he met. Public service, for him, was the ultimate goal, and what he accomplished in impacting lives of many people was enormous and really unquantifiable. Now, let me ask the Foundation's president, John Sartakis, to introduce President Burwell, as she is a role model in the tradition of devoting her career to public service.
Thank you, Dick, and good evening. It's my great pleasure to introduce Sylvia Mathews Burwell to the Hellenic-American Cultural Foundation. I spent 3 very busy years in Washington at American University's law school, Washington College of Law, and I'm very grateful to the university for helping launch my career. Sylvia Burwell is really a wonderfully appropriate person to give this public service lecture because her career has been a how-to manual on the subject, really. Born and raised in a small town in West Virginia, she's descended from 4 Greek immigrant grandparents. She was interested in public service from a young age and worked on the Dukakis and later the Bill Clinton presidential campaigns. After graduating Harvard, she worked briefly at McKinsey. It's okay to work in the private sector too, Nick. Before taking on numerous high-profile roles in the Clinton administration, including Deputy Chief of Staff to the President and Deputy director of the Office of Management and Budget. And at OMB, she was an integral part of the team that gave the U.S. its, I would say, probably the last U.S. budget surpluses that we're likely to see probably in our lifetimes. I hope not, but you never know. In 2001, she joined the Gates Foundation, where she worked on a number of health-related initiatives, before returning to public service in 2013 as President Obama's director of OMB, to which she was unanimously confirmed by the US Senate, something else we very rarely see these days. And a year later, she became the Secretary of Health and Human Services during a very stressful time, I imagine, of the period in healthcare. And shortly after leaving government service, she was named the 15th president of American University, where she'll be wrapping up her tenure later this year. And we thank you for that too, as graduates, several of us in the audience of American University. There's a lot more of her biography in the program, which you can read. When we first approached President Burwell last year, it was around the time of the 60th anniversary of President Kennedy's famous American University commencement address. His speech was largely about world peace, but he also spoke about community peace and the importance of living together in mutual tolerance, because, he said, however fixed our likes and dislikes may seem, the tide of time and events will often bring surprising changes in the relations between nations and neighbors. Of course, Greeks know this implicitly, given their multi-thousand-year historical perspective. But in this time of great international and domestic conflict, we look to leaders like Sylvia Burwell for hope and inspiration to overcome those divisions. I hope I'm not putting too much pressure on you. Solve world peace. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sylvia Mathews Burwell.
John, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me here tonight. I actually am going to not start my remarks because I do have to honor Senator Sarbanes and just tell one quick story. And when I was fortunate enough to be selected as a Rhodes Scholar to go and study at Oxford, I got this small handwritten note, and it was from the senator's mother. And Senator Sarbanes' mother wrote me a note, and she said, I understand that you are Greek American, and I am the mother of Senator Paul Sarbanes, and my grandson Michael is already at Oxford. He will be taking care of you. I'm afraid that I did not fulfill her dream, that Michael and I did not fulfill her dream and intention of the note. We are very, very good friends. But that is how I got to know the Sarbanes family, is through the senator's mother. That's how I first, but in a true Greek grandmother fashion. It really is an honor to be the fourth Peter T. Kourides lecturer, and I promise to try to be entertaining like Senator Sarbanes and informative like Ambassador Negroponte and my friend and colleague, former DCI George Tenet. Nick, I'm humbled to be here as part of your father's legacy. Your father's decades of service to the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America and Archbishop Iakovos in particular serve as an example for all of us, for people like me, to see and to follow. And public service or service to others is really an act of putting the needs of others before your own. And your father exemplified that over and over again through his faithful guidance, his expert counsel, and today his legacy lives on through the church that is part of the fabric that we as Greek Americans know. And the job of a public servant, I believe, is to prioritize the greater good. And as someone who has made a career in public service, I can tell you that at times that work is challenging and difficult, and I know that he faced that at times too. But in between sometimes the challenging and the difficult is that real, incredible reward that comes from working to make a difference for others, to make the world better in big ways and in small ways. And the ancient Greeks had a word for practical wisdom, phronesis. And tonight I'm going to try and have a little conversation a little bit about my life in public service, as well as my Greek heritage and how they're intertwined, and try and share a few lessons I've learned in the hopes that we can carry public service forward. And being Greek is a part of who I am in so many ways, from the jewelry that I wear. And I was at an event, and it was interesting because someone actually asked. They saw my cross, they asked, and then the person beside us, she's like, well, I'm Greek too, see? And you know, it's the traditions that we pass on to our children. Easter in the Burwell household, and Burwell is my husband's name. Mathews is my maiden name, and you'll understand that in a few moments. In our household, there is always a rousing, and I will say highly competitive game. I know where you all are thinking, and I do have my red dye to make my kokino avga. We're ready in the Burwell household. And it's also the values that connect us as Greeks. Faith and love, the importance of education, a joy of living, the French joie de vivre, and philotimo. And so tonight I wanted to spend a little bit on each of those values, and how they served as guideposts throughout my career in public service. But as my mom, Cleo Mathews, reminded me the other day, she said, even Greek people don't want to listen to Greek people speak for 30 minutes, Sylvia. So I'm going to leave plenty of time for question and conversation. She's like, don't speak that long. So why am I focusing on these 4 concepts in particular? It's because I believe that Greek values, the ones that stem back long ago to our ancestors, they still guide the way our democracy functions and how we view such concepts as liberty and equality. And they are more important now than actually ever. And as we grapple with the challenges in our nation of polarity, hate, selfishness, and a lack of substance and facts, both here in this country and throughout the world, our Greekness not only unites us as a people, but also compels us to reach out across these divides and to build bridges to a brighter future. And yes, we are a people of pride, and that's a big part of who we are. My father actually told me that every word I spoke came from a Greek root. And that was before Michael Constantine, as Gus Portokalas said it in my big fat Greek wedding. And while it is true that many parts of our culture and our history are not all shining lights, that's not my focus for tonight. And it's not the dominant story of the Greek people. This lecture series was created to honor Nick's dad, Peter, who gave so much of his life to the church. So I'm going to start tonight with the concept of faith. I was baptized Greek Orthodox, and yes, we wore Stephana crowns at the wedding. My husband had one rule: you can do anything you want in the wedding as long as it's not over an hour. I was raised in the Episcopal Church and remain active in that church today. And you're probably wondering, like, how did this all happen? But as a second-generation Greek American, as you all probably know, it all starts with my family's immigration story. So both sets of my grandparents immigrated to the United States from Greece during the wave of immigration that was beginning in the early 1900s, as World War I was starting. One grandfather left Zakynthos and ended up in Williamson, West Virginia, where he laid railroad tracks into the mines so that you could produce coal for the steel effort. It was going up north to another place that one of our friends here knows well, that was production for the war effort. After the war ended, he had made enough money to start a restaurant, which was called Denny's. No, not that Denny's. If it were that Denny's, there would be spanakopita on the late night menu. His name, though, was Dionysius, and so thus Denny's the restaurant. My other grandfather, on my father's side, his name was Mantheopoulos, until we got to Ellis Island, and then it became Mathews, which is my maiden name. He came here from Sparta through Ellis Island. And he gets on a train and he goes to Detroit. And he learns to fix cars in the Motor City, and then he heads back east. And on that trip, he stops in a very small town in southern West Virginia called Hinton, West Virginia, and it was a railroad town. And because he could fix cars, he could fix railroad cars. And so he works on the railroad and saves enough money to, yes, you guessed it, start a restaurant, the Sweet Shop. So both grandfathers in different towns in southern West Virginia, they go back to Greece, or plan to go back to Greece when it was time to marry. My mother's father, this is my mother's father, had a Greek friend in Williamson, West Virginia, who had a wife who had a brother in Greece who wanted to get married. You got that? My grandfather's friend's wife's brother, this is my grandfather's friend's wife's brother, in Greece couldn't get married because the woman he wanted to marry, her older sister was not married. Yeah, exactly. I don't have to explain it here. You have to explain it in so many places. Birth order. So, the friend's wife decides to set my grandfather up with letters to the older sister in Greece as a favor to her brother. So the two write letters back and forth until my grandfather proposed to this woman in Greece. And so he then set sail for Paris to meet his future bride. He was going to go as far as Paris. Her father was going to bring her, and her father brought her from Nemea, and they were married by a justice of the peace in where they could find a place in Paris. And interestingly, that spot is now Christian Dior. That's what's on the spot there. Yes, so if you're shopping in Paris and you happen to go in there, I hope you'll think about my grandparents meeting for the first time and committing to spend their lives in a small town in West Virginia. On my other side, my father's father was betrothed to a woman in Sparta. That's where he came from. And he sets sail from West Virginia, and on the boat going back, he meets a gentleman from Athens, another guy, and this guy convinced him, just spend one night in Athens with me. He's like, no, I gotta go, I gotta keep going because I gotta get my wife and get, and get back. My grandfather reluctantly agreed, and let's just say my grandmother is from Athens. Thus, when I was talking to people before and they said, have you been to all the places? And that's the only place that I have not been. We don't go back to Sparta. So both my parents grew up in West Virginia and raised me and my sister in Hinton. It's a small town it's now 2,600. It was 3,000 when I grew up, and nestled in the Appalachian Mountains. And one thing about Hinton and Williamson, Hinton, the town my father's from, Williamson, the town that my mother is from, they're about 4 hours apart, both lacked a Greek Orthodox church. But in both communities, it was the Episcopal Church that allowed the Greek Orthodox priests to come, do baptisms, do weddings, and do funerals. And so growing up, that's why I am a Greek Orthodox Episcopalian. And so growing up, faith was at the center of who we were as individuals and as a family. And in West Virginia, our community made sure that my family had a place to practice and live God's love. And just as generation after generation of Greeks do in terms of the issues of faith. And it was there in that community, far away from Athens, Sparta, Zakynthos, that we learned about faith, and faith in something bigger, and a God whose love and grace is beyond understanding. And I've leaned on that faith, throughout my career. It is the grounding. And that's why this lecture was so important for me to come and do. Sorry. From grappling with the deep poverty that I encountered during my work at the Gates Foundation, to strategizing in the Situation Room about how to curtail the Ebola epidemic, to managing a student-based research university through COVID, my faith is something greater and it has been a source of strength in all of my public service. And that faith, I believe, is an essential part of Greekness. Sorry. It grounds us and anchors us in our family, in our community, in our world. And oh, by the way, what would the world be without Greek festivals in communities across this entire country? It's true. It's true. Everybody goes. Everybody goes. The importance of education was another value that was instilled for me from a young age. Before I learned to count, I learned to say that education is the key to social and economic mobility and essential to leading the good life. As Aristotle said, those who educate children well are more to be honored than those who produce them. For those only gave them life, and the other gave them living well. And I get to see the importance of that statement every day on the American University campus, where our faculty and our staff and help our students to thrive physically, mentally, and socially, and feel a sense of belonging as they grow and evolve as change makers. And it's pretty inspiring to get to witness on a daily basis. For my family, education has always been an essential part of life, from the cradle to the grave. And I'm proud to say that on both sides of my Greek family, they believed that education was essential regardless of gender. My mother went to college in Cincinnati, a long way from West Virginia in the 1950s. And my father's parents sent my Aunt Catherine across the mountain to Concord College after a small mishap involving her use of tuition funds to take flying lessons. She did get her degree. My papu Denny was really proud that he had two granddaughters that went to Harvard University. And while he himself had an 8th grade education, he loved learning, and he read the Wall Street Journal every day until he died at 105. And I remember how he told me sometime in the 1990s, he said, he was very advanced at that point in age, and I was still very young, and he looked at me and he said, climate change is going to be the biggest problem for your generation. Talk about pronesis, if only he were here right now to help us solve these problems. I will say I tested the limits of our family's love of education when I turned 40 and was still not married. My papu told me, as only a Greek grandfather could, I think we may have overeducated you. He did not live to meet my husband, Stephen, and our two beautiful children, Helene and Matthew, but I know he knows that all that education worked out okay. And this concept of education and its importance to the Greek community is hardwired. When I was privileged to work on the Michael Dukakis campaign for president, I learned that at that time, Greek Americans are the most educated ethnic group. No surprise to me or anyone in this room. Today, they continue to earn advanced degrees at high rates, and that learning is lifelong. My father started playing the piano at the age of 65. He took Spanish at the age of 70. And the other day, I was talking to my mom, Cleo, who is 88. Do not tell her that I told you all her age. She still gives me her daily update, Woman on the Street report from Hinton, and I call and she says, you're interrupting my online class. I'm getting my credential to give communion at the church. Education and faith. Which brings me to the next value or concept, which is joy of life, joie de vivre. Or to go back to Aristotle, eudaimonia. Whatever you call it, we, the Greeks, have perfected it. Zorba was Greek, not French. And we are a people who experience and welcome the full range of emotions in life, but we still focus on the joy. No one would characterize us as dour. When you tell people you're Greek, and they say they have a Greek neighbor or they have a Greek friend, what follows is a story about joy or fun or one of the concepts these values that I'm talking about. We embrace life and we live it to its fullest. And nowhere is that more evident than Greek cuisine. I know there are many cultures and people that say that food is at the center of their culture. But I am sure, like most phrases, food as a love language originated with the Greek people. Just as the ancient Greeks and goddesses consumed ambrosia and nectar on Mount Olympus, food continues to connect family, friends, and build community, and anchor so much of our time together. Throughout my career in public service, I've seen how food reminds us that we're all people. Sometimes that's all we need to try and solve some problems. Every time, it's an important way to communicate, whether the fry bread on the Navajo Nation when I visited there as part of my work with the Gates Foundation to bring fiber optic technology and future to an area that had been economically deprived for generations, to coffee and cake at the kitchen tables in the South when we were working hard to implement the Affordable Care Act and ensure that all Americans have access to affordable health care, to the breakfast that I actually still host in my office at AU with students, faculty, and staff, where I learn about the latest research that our faculty is doing or TikTok trends from our students. I have seen how that food can humanize, how it can actually unite, and how it can even inspire. And if you're Greek, I think you know, as most of us are here, you know, you have memories of food that surpass many other memories, and they encompass what it means to be Greek. For me, food means family, including extended family. And the idea that I've carried into my career in public service that food brings us together to discuss, to collaborate, and solve the world's problems. And that all started at my grandparents' table. I can still see and smell those dinners. The smells were even better in the kitchen at the kids' table. And of course, the conversations. My grandparents' table was also where I learned the art of debate and restraint. When my sister and I finally moved from the kids' table to the big time in the dining room, we would listen to my Uncle Charlie and Sam start in on politics. And one of these uncles, by the way, wasn't actually a blood relative, but a relative all the same. And this Greek concept is something that I still have to continue explaining to my husband, Stephen, who is not Greek, though my family swears he's Greek. He's Stephen, his brother's Jim, Dimitri, his mother's Joanne, his niece is Georgia. My family is sure he's Greek, and they just don't know it. My sister and I would hold our tongues and listen, usually until dessert, and then the back and forth would begin. Baklava, kumbedya, metaxa, not even these sweets would subdue the back and forth. Life's joys and sorrows were examined and worked out around that food and those tables. Food also was defining to my family's livelihood. For my family and so many other Greek and immigrant families in the U.S., our American dream was fueled by small family-owned restaurants. I learned the value of hard work by seeing how my grandfather worked at his restaurant, beginning very early at 5 in the morning, methodically building a business that anchored our family and acted as an economic engine in his community. It's truly fitting that my only real print publication is actually a recipe for spanakopita in a recipe book. It's possible that my papu may be more proud of that than my degree at Harvard. My grandparents and my parents taught me to work hard, but also to play hard, keeping family and friends at the center. And right now, Stephen and I are preparing to move again. I think some of you know this. I'm ending my time as president, and I was getting some boxes ready for the move and pictures ready. When you have those photo albums, you can't help, you stop, you open them up, you're supposed to keep, no, it doesn't work. And I flipped through some of the albums, and there are pages and pages of my family and the joy, and I know so many of you all can relate. Many of the people in those pictures have passed, but their memory and the joys of that memory are truly eternal. This joy of life is also a part of what drives me to public service. What gives me joy is making a difference, using my talents and time to try to make the world a better place, a place where everyone can live a life of love and joy, as if they are Greek. The last concept I want to focus on tonight is philotimo, or love of honor. And when I think of public service, I think of philotimo. It's much more than that. But to me, philotimo is often summed up in the story from the island of Zakynthos, where my grandfather is from. And in 1944, there were only 275 Jews left on the island. And when the Nazis demanded a list of the remaining Jewish people so they could be rounded up, the mayor and the bishop gave them a list of 2 names. The list had their names. That is philotimo. In growing up, I learned the concept, interestingly, and only years later did I actually learn the word, because it was just the way we lived. My parents believed that because this great country welcomed us and God gave us so many blessings, of course you should think beyond yourself. It is an essential part of being honorable. And whether it was my mother, who would send us out the door as kids to collect money in the neighborhood for flowers when someone passed away, or required us to trick or treat for UNICEF before you could trick or treat for candy, we were always taught to put the needs of our community first. With Girl Scout cookie sales to boot, it's no wonder that the neighbors hid when I came around. My father belonged to every funny hat service organization that actually existed. My mother is still active in the service club. Actually, last night when I called, she made attendance calls for their monthly meeting last night, and you should be glad you're not on that list. She was part of the Business and Professional Women's Club, the Friends of the Library, and the list goes on. Our family's dedication to community included our church, where my father was the lay reader and often led the service, and my mother was president of the church women, the Episcopal version of the Ladies of Philotikos Society. My sister was the organist, and I was the crucifer. And as I mentioned, my mom is still actively involved in that parish today. Giving to others and serving was as much about what it meant for you as what it meant for others. Love of honor. It seems only natural that I would choose the path that I chose. I've been so blessed to be able to work and serve in the places where I could live out the concept of philotimo in large and small ways. I had the privilege of working for President Barack Obama, both as his Health and Human Services Secretary and as his Director of the Office of Management and Budget. And President Obama, I think, had a special affinity for Greece and Greek people. His final trip overseas was to Greece. And this is what he said in his speech in Athens. In all our communities, in all our countries, I still believe there's more of what Greeks call philotimo, love and respect and kindness for family and community and country, a sense that we're all in this together with obligations to each other. Philotimo, I see it every day, and it gives me hope. And while I could give more examples of the ways in which my career in public service has allowed me to live out that concept, and we would be happy to do so maybe when we turn to our conversation if folks have questions, I want to close as a proud Greek mom with the story of my daughter, Helene. She used to illustrate the concept of what philotimo means to her, a third-generation Greek American. And Helene wrote an essay, I have to say, an award-winning essay, about our visit to Greece a few years ago. And on that visit, Helene and her brother Matthew met many cousins, as one does when one visits family in Greece. But Helene was particularly struck by one very little cousin, a little guy about 5 years old, and full of that 5-year-old energy. And they were playing together. This was on the farm where my grandfather was from in Zakynthos. Very, farm, and we were eating, and they were playing together with his toy soldiers. And when it was time to go, he gave her one to take with her. And he chose the only one that was perfect, that wasn't cracked. It was the best one, and that's what he gave to her. And that generosity of spirit of a 5-year-old, and that instinct to put others before yourself. That is philotimo. Sorry. Emotional topics. And as the pre-Socratic philosopher Thales of Miletus said, philotimo to the Greeks is like breathing. A Greek is not a Greek without it. He might as well not be alive. Philotimo, there's no question that we need more of it in our world today. As Greeks, it's up to us to lead with our values and be the change that we want to see. To quote another wise Greek who happens to be a demigod and dyslexic, hyperactive boy with a D+ report card, the infamous Percy Jackson, for those of you who are familiar, our choices reveal who we really are, far more than our abilities. Every day, I try to choose to emulate the values that were instilled in me through my Greek heritage as I work to try and make the world a better place. That, I believe, is the essence of our shared Greekness and the key to a successful life in public service. Thank you for being here tonight, and I look forward to your questions. And I'm happy to take questions. And there was a question I was asked before, but if others, yes, please. John, yeah?
So we've all heard about a lot of the campus unrest around the country, different groups arguing about different things, people speaking, people not speaking. How do you bridge those divides at AU?
So it's a time that I think is unique for campuses right now, and many people hearken back to the Vietnam days and say, you know, you had lots of protests, including obviously what happened in Kent State and that sort of thing. But there is a difference, I think, in the times. And during the war, for the most part, the Vietnam War, the students and the faculty were basically united in a point of view. Whereas right now, that is not the situation on our campuses. And the campuses are extremely divided. And the approach that I have taken to this issue is, as a university president, my #1 responsibility is the safety and support of our students and our communities. And so as we went through the fall, we focused on safety and trying to ensure that you keep a space where people are physically safe. As you know, it's been very difficult, and some campuses have had violence. And every day I am thankful and grateful and know it could change any day. But focusing on safety, focusing on support, because no matter what you believe or how you think about October 7th and the things that were before and the things that have followed after, there are people who are in deep pain on all sides of this issue. So trying to create space where you provide support for people who are in pain. And then the third idea is the idea of the importance of giving people a place where they can express themselves. And so much of that just came to me and my team and the president's office because people are at a place where they cannot express themselves to each other because they're the ability to have dialogue. I know everyone says, why don't you do what Dartmouth did? That was a unique situation where those professors had been doing that for a very long time, a dialogue, even trying to have dialogue. But we are working, and we have a strategy and a strategic approach. I've put in place some policies to help us get through this semester in safe ways, and we're really doing 4 things at the university. 1, we are focused on our educational mission and how we think about these issues in our educational mission and how different parts of this get exhibited. And that means what's happening in the classroom to differing students and how they feel about what's happening in the classroom, how people think about these issues substantively. And so our provost is leading the effort there. Also, as part of that, we have a freedom of expression working group. We had updated our freedom of expression policy the year before. But we brought that group back and are continuing to have that group be a part of our dialogue and conversations. That's connected to the education. The second area is, at American University, our work is called inclusive excellence. At other institutions, it's called DEI, but we took a different approach 6 years ago when this became a part of our strategy. And our work, our inclusive excellence work includes veterans groups, includes all kinds of people. And so we're making sure that that work includes concepts of religion, which many have not. And so we're working to incorporate concepts of religion, which gets you to the issues of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia as well. Those areas. The third area is we are working with an outside firm to review all of our conduct policies and procedures. Because I think what most universities have experienced and seen is that the policies and procedures of the past are not strong enough, are not well suited to or made for the present situations that we face. And that includes everything from how people express themselves in protest. What does disruption mean? How do you think about time, place, and manner? And so we're doing all of that work. And then the last thing is we have a stream of work that's focused on the issues of stakeholder and communication. And that's both about listening and communicating about the work we're doing. So that's the plan and the work that we have in place that we're working across our entire community on. It is a very difficult space and time. Danny Pearl's father, when he was killed many years ago, he started doing a dialogue actually with one of the professors at American University. And they've done this dialogue everywhere, but we asked them to try and do it in the fall, and they said, not ready. The camp, people aren't ready. And we had them scheduled for 3 weeks ago, and they said, still not ready. The country and people are very, very raw right now, and campuses are a place where it is felt in an extreme way. But that's our plan as we try and work through. But really starting with that concept of, my job is to create a safe place where people can learn. And so that's our starting point and how we focus. Thank you, John. Yes?
Have your skills and knowledge from HSS, Health and Human Services, and OMB translated to the private sector as you were in both the Gates Foundation and now American University? What skills, what challenges, how have you managed to navigate such different?
So I'll say one thing that is more tactical and one thing that is more at the 30,000 foot level. The tactical thing I'll say is, I will say that my board was pretty happy when COVID occurred and they had the former secretary of HHS and the former director of OMB. And I'm sure you can imagine how those skills, made a difference to how, very quickly I understood our universities. We're the 5th largest employer in the District of Columbia. Our student population, if we didn't take certain actions, what was happening in New York was going to happen in DC in terms of if we had all those cases and that we were driving that, And so the knowledge of the health issues and that were particularly relevant as we were managing through COVID. And I will say it did not hurt to be a former OMB director in terms of budgets as you were facing those financial challenges during that time. At the larger level, in terms of the translation of skills, what's interesting is that for the most part, large complex organizations and large complex problems, how you approach them is similar, whether it's the private sector or the public sector. Clearly and quickly getting to what are the key elements. So whether it's in the private sector or the public sector, if you have a problem, if I have Ebola in the US government or I'm managing, you can probably hear I got to a strategic framework in a post-October 7th world. Understanding, what does success look like? How are you going to measure success? And working backwards from that in terms of how you get there. And so those are the translatable skills that I think that have just kind of come through any of the, whether it was the Gates Foundation or when I was at Walmart or in government in terms of that. So I think that's, and the other thing that I think is just a continual thing is the importance of people and relationships. And whether that's the, my vote when I became OMB director or working with a board. The importance of relationships and respect for people. And respect for people that may share your point of view or not share your point of view is something that I think is a thread that goes through trying to work and manage in any of these settings. Yes? So one thing that I'm fortunate about is that American University, our campaign and all that we're doing is change makers for a changing world. So we attract a particular type of student. It's a university where the law school was started by women in the late 1800s. It is a place where we were the first university to be carbon neutral. It is a place where General Eisenhower dedicated our School of International Service, not School of Foreign Affairs, and said, we will wage peace. This is a place that will wage peace. It's much more aligned with the concepts we're talking about. So that helps a little bit. But the larger question, I think, is a very real one. And I think one of the best things is for these young people, they will have how many different jobs? Most of them, will have 10 to 15 different jobs, and we don't even know what those jobs are. So helping them understand that some of the most critical and important skills they can learn it's about problem solving. It's about working and understanding others who are different. It is about being able to use data in different ways, no matter what it is. And so I think as we think about what our curriculum is and how we think about it and how we connect them to that desire for what they want to do, I think that's a big part of it. The second thing I'll say, and I had mentioned this to others, I was going to give kind of a deep, dark speech about the individual versus community, and that, we have swung too far to the individual. And so a lot of what we hear from our young people is very focused on the individual versus the community. And my point is, as an institution, trying to create the things that help connect a person to community so that they lift up their chin and see around them and understand the concepts that we're discussing tonight is the other way to do it in terms of it. It is a very real issue. And I think as higher education institutions, we have to hear and understand that the value proposition of higher ed has evolved and changed. What you get for what you pay, and part of the what you pay part is why have we had inflation that is higher than core inflation for 20 years in higher ed and healthcare, the two sectors I've worked in. And I believe there are reasons for that. But we need to hear what you're hearing from your research, but help put it in the broader context. I think there was someone over here. Was there? Yes. Thank you. So Stephen and I made this decision. We really made it last year in May, and we felt at this point, and it's why we made this decision is important to the next step. And I felt like did what I came to do for American University. Excited about where the university is, whether that's doubling externally funded research. We are now, have $1 billion endowment. We have 8 new chairs that, the student success, all of that. And so did what I came to do there and made this decision because our children are 14 and 16. And for our kids' entire life, nights and weekends, always. I've always had a job that's about nights and weekends. And so what is next in terms of my impact I will continue to have impact. I'll be a distinguished lecturer at American. I'll be on some boards. I'll have a full-time job. I'm not retiring. But I'm looking forward to a place and space where my impact can be felt in my home in a greater way. So that's... and I also have been very clear about it because I actually think that's important in modeling that, that you do. You step away, you should be able to prioritize what you want to. As you all heard, my mother is 88, don't tell her again, but very healthy and don't know that she'll make it to the 105 that her father did, but I want to enjoy her, and you can't get back the time. And so right now, that is really where my impact will be. I'm excited to do the things that I'll be doing, but just having impact in a different way in terms of the work that I'll do at the university and on boards, both not-for-profit and for-profit. Anyone else? Yes. I would answer the question of where do I see American University in 10 years. Certainly I would defer to my successor, who will soon be named, in terms of what that person sees. But what I actually believe, I'll answer maybe the question in terms of higher education and more broadly. There are 3 things that I think higher education, post-secondary education, universities need to do right now in order to address some of the issue that you were raising in terms of the question of what students and their families want. The first thing is we need to design around our mission at the center. And so we need to design around the student and scholarship and research. That's what we do as a university. You're producing knowledge and you're moving that knowledge to people. And historically, in higher education and healthcare, which is one of the reasons that I believe that you have had a situation where inflation is higher than core inflation in these sectors, is because they were both designed around the provider, not the consumer. And I know in higher ed, and I'm sure there are higher education people here in our audience, we don't use the word consumer, but for purposes of this, I believe you need to think of it. So that's number one in terms of how higher education needs to design. That's why the research you're doing is extremely important, because we need to think that way. How do you put the research needs of our nation and our world and the needs of our students at the center of designing and how you create what your university does? The second thing is we need to think about higher education as a sector. right now, higher education is under deep fire. You might have noticed, been in the news a lot, had a lot of problems, and there are legitimate criticisms. Part of the sector recognizing what's legitimate and not legitimate is you have to think about it as a sector, the sector of education. When you think about most things, from medicine to cars, there are different cars for different needs. And because you know, a Mini can't do what a minivan can do, we don't condemn the car industry. What we do is we think about different people have different needs. And you need to think as a sector, we need to think about what are the needs of our nation and the world, but mainly our nation as we think through what are the different needs of different populations. And that connects to, these are three circles that are related. Put the consumer at the center, think about a sector, and then the third one is we need to differentiate and not be all things to all people. And you can do that once you have answered the other two, when you get those three circles. And so in doing that, and I think that's what I have worked to have American University do, differentiate in terms of where we're going to fit in that picture, who we serve, what we do, and what we produce. The university will likely become research level 1. The results, we have the results that will be reviewed a year, all this stuff, you know, why the delay, I don't know. So, you know, our research function, we know what we're doing there. We have areas we've specialized in. In terms of serving students, we are very focused on this change makers idea. In terms of that's who comes to American University. We just got an NSF grant because we got the only one in the humanities for transformational research, because we move, this is not an ivory tower kind of place that you know, has a active student body that comes with it, but those are the things that I think will continue and differentiate the university. Yes.
Has your Greek background and perspective affected Americans' curriculum at all? Classics or?
No, it hasn't in that way. It hasn't in that way. Actually, yes, no, it has not. I think it has in, I would say it hasn't in the way you described, but I believe it has in the values that I described, and the importance of those things and how that goes through the institution and the university. These concepts of service, the concepts of, you know, connecting community, and I will say food, because we do have food. It is one of the things that, like, in terms of the events and that sort of thing, these breakfasts that I have and that sort of thing. So it has in that way. But I'm not sure that it has in the other ways. But those are the two things that everyone knows about me. I'm Greek and I'm from West Virginia. Those are the two things that anyone who knows me knows that, you know, I'm proud of all of those things. Yes.
In many articles, everyone comments about how well organized you are. And I was just wondering whether that has anything to do with your mother being mayor of the town for 2 terms in Virginia, West Virginia, and whether that has impacted the way you approach it.
You know, my mother is quite organized and quite effective, you know, has very high executive function. I'll do it that way. And even at 88, it is amazing to me. When she called the other night, she's like, okay, I've gotten all the poll workers for the election. She's like, organized all the poll workers for the election. I was like, great, good, glad you've done that. Found out that the cemetery is only letting us bury people on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you can't do it after 5. We've got to change that. I called the state. I've gotten the paperwork. We're going to do a suit against this big firm that bought the cemeteries. And I'm like, great, good, good, good. You know, my mother is a force. She makes me look like I sit around and twiddle my thumbs. What you didn't say is my mother had never held an elected office. Well, she had been appointed to the State Board of Education by the governor, And actually, when I was in the Clinton administration, my mother was invited to fly on Air Force One because of the work that she had done in education in the state. They let me fly along with her for her work. At 65, she saw corruption in our little town. And there were people, our town is, we're poor. I mean, I live in the part of West Virginia that's one of the poorest parts of this country. And so there were some people who were not using the monies wisely. And so she decided she was going to run at 65 for mayor because that needed to be taken care of. She loses 15 pounds going door to door. And she becomes mayor and serves 2 terms. So yes, I did learn a tremendous amount from my mother in terms of that. My father, though, is the man who taught me to embroidery, to quilt. And I mean, he was, and that's the science. The math and science part was my father, and the arts. He taught us to paint. He taught us to develop pictures. My father is the man who read the book. I learned to play tennis because my father read a book. And that's how we learned in terms of that. So my sister and I were incredibly lucky in terms of our parents and the many, many, many things that they taught us. And my father in the tennis, so I never had a tennis lesson. I had Bill Mathews and a book. But when I came and I worked for McKinsey, McKinsey was, during those days, had a number of different athletic things, and I would participate. So McKinsey had like a tennis team, basically. And so I played for the McKinsey team, and we would go, and I still remember once going, and like I had never belonged to a club or anything like that, so like I wore shorts. I wore a polo shirt. I didn't wear a t-shirt. And we go and we play Tiffany's. McKinsey played Tiffany's, and another woman and I were playing. And it was just a very different world than Bill Mathews in his book. You will be pleased to know, even though they had a coach with them. They had a coach with them. And the guy was like making snide remarks about our apparel and the way we looked. But I will say we took him. Took him. Definitely took him. Yes. Yes. And I will also, in McKinsey and tennis, so we'd go off to these learning events. And, you know, the partners would be there. And, like, you know, this one partner just kept wanting to play and play. So I played. And, you know, this is where my mother was like, did I not teach you anything? I beat the partner. And she's like, Sylvia, do you understand the way this works? But, yes, our parents, we were just incredibly lucky. And our whole family. You know, that is the Greek family. Our uncles. When I graduated from college, everybody came up. You know, my uncles came, my aunts came, everybody's there. We have to get extra tickets. We have to do all these things. Same thing. My husband was very smart and proposed to me in Hinton, West Virginia, so we could be married in Seattle, where he was from and where we were living. And so he thought, if I propose to her there, then we can have the wedding. And we did do that. But the thing about the pictures, his whole family's from Seattle. In the pictures, you can imagine like my family picture. Everybody, of course, all the Greeks come. In terms of our family has always been a huge part of teaching me everything from values to like how to have high executive function and do these things. Yes. Yes.
The nice discussions we had. But here's the thing. So today, the latest statistic that I read about colleges is that the average is 45% liberal professors to 45 liberal professors to 1 conservative, whereas in the 60s, it was 2 to
So one of the things about higher ed is the issue of tenure. And tenure. So you have people who have chosen. The other thing is who chooses to be in the field and why in terms of those issues. So, I think we all work to hire in that, and we need to work and do that more. Controlling who goes into the field is a little bit of a harder thing, but focusing deeply on the question of differing voices being heard is quite important. I mean, and that was one of the things that for me was a very important part. And even though I come from clearly I've worked for Democratic presidents, my relationships, it was John McCain introduced me when I was before the Senate. Dr. Tom Coburn from Oklahoma, one of the most conservative senators, introduced me. And so I would bring those folks to campus. When we launched the Sign Institute, where I will go this year, we launched the Institute with Bob Corker, Republican from Tennessee. It is important for people to hear differing points of view. And you have to work to do that. And you have to work to have people being willing to actually listen to people and differing points of view. And it's something that we spend a tremendous amount of time trying to focus on so that you can do it. It's a little hard to control who chooses to go into fields. That part's a little hard to do, but making sure that you have, our head of the faculty senate right now is, one of the most conservative people on our campus, and that's great. And we embrace that, and that's wonderful, even if the numbers are as they describe. And I think we do have to work hard. That's when I talked about the inclusive excellence work. Sometimes one of the voices on campuses that are not heard actually are voices of faith, any faith, our faith, our faith, the Jewish faith, the Islamic faith. People should be able to do Ramadan right now and be respected. And it should be understood that, I've got student athletes who aren't eating. They're observing their faith and they're not eating for the entire day. So how do you think about that in practice? How do you think about all of these things? For us, should students have time off on Good Friday? Right? And so these are challenging issues. And I think, the statistics are what the statistics are. I'm not sure that anyone set out to have that. On the campuses, you want these voices. But what we need on the campuses also, though, I'm sure you've looked at the research, how young people feel about when they come to us, their willingness and their openness to being uncomfortable in any way, shape, or form. And that's across the board, all of them. In terms of I wrote a piece, actually when I first became president, for Foreign Affairs called Generation Stress. And we have, one of the premises of the piece is we have taken out risk. So when they come to us, everybody gets a soccer trophy, and when you fall off the monkey bars at school, you fall onto nice chips and stuff like that versus, you broke your arm when you were my age if you fell when I was ill. And so how do these things interact with the parenting and all the things that we've created? And then when you add the gasoline on the fire of social media and how that works, these are some very challenging issues that we're going to have to confront as a nation. You try and do it as I'm saying, in terms of bringing voices and doing it that way. But there are some fundamental underlying concepts that we've got to work on in terms of divide and willingness to listen and hear each other. There was one other question that I was asked before that I will answer, which was, I was asked, is it more political to run a university in the current times? Or is it more political to be the secretary of HHS or the director of OMB? And I will answer that question by saying, so when I was considering this job, and I'm sure you're not surprised, I did my research. I called Donna Shalala, who's had both jobs. I called Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, the senator from Tennessee. He'd been both a cabinet secretary and a senator. I call Erskine Bowles. He's been chief of staff, and I call and do my research. And interestingly, they all actually told me this job is harder than the cabinet jobs they had. But then they kind of granted the point that being secretary of HHS during Ebola and the Affordable Care Act, probably a toss-up. But they all said something that they said it's so political. But in the end, that's not what I have found. And that's not how I would describe it. Paul Ryan and I, I've known Paul since we were very young when we both started out, and I understand politics. That's a world I've worked in. But this isn't political. In universities, the incentives are not structured around the community or the core mission. They're structured around the individual. It's your tenure. It's your degree. And you're only there for 4 years, or 7 if it's a PhD or whatever. And so what I found is it's not so much that it's political, it's that the incentives are not in terms of a core mission and all of us pulling in the boat together. And then the other part of it that I would say is that it's about the incentives, and that the stakeholders have very disparate points of view. And in most organizations, that's not necessarily, the difference between a term faculty member and a tenured faculty member and how they feel about each other is another example. So that was a question that I was asked before, and that is my answer to it. Thank you. I think we're... Thank you. Okay.
All right, that's it. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll keep you informed of events in the future. Cheers.